Independent presidential and parliamentary candidates are more likely to do well in the three regions of the North in the upcoming December elections. That's according to research conducted by iRIS Research Group. The focus of the research was to examine the performance of the third-party presidential aspirants and independent parliamentary candidates in Ghana using historical elections data from 1996 to 2006. Well, the research also revealed that third-party presidential candidates have served as kingmakers in the two presidential elections, 1992, 2000, and 2008 presidential elections. Now, Dr. Theo Achampong is an economist and political risk analyst, also co-founder of iRIS Research Group, and he joins us via Zoom. Many thanks for your time, Dr. Achampong. First of all,
pleasure.
Good. Run us through the methodology of this survey.
Okay, thank you very much. So basically, we started off with a very simple premise, which is to understand really the performance of all the third-party presidential candidates, as well as third-party or independent MPs as well. And the basis for it was to use the historical data. And the premise, again, is simple, that can the past be any good predictor of the future? So we went back to look at or crunch all the data and look at where, if any, these candidates are doing well at the regional level. And then, of course, to further drill down to understand the underlying dynamics or drivers. But the key highlight is that since 1996 and coming into 2000, where we saw third-party candidates cumulatively polling about 7% of the polls, that has been on a consistent trend over the years, and they have been dropping an average of 30,000 votes between successive elections, and now currently are sitting around 190 or so thousand votes, which is just under 1.5% of the total voter base. And given with that as given, it's quite then unlikely for any third-party presidential candidate to actually mount any successful challenge in terms of unseating either the NPP or the NDC.
Yes, I was coming to that whether a third-party candidate can actually be a kingmaker in the upcoming elections, because clearly, I mean, the data on the ground shows that the fight is really between the NDC and the NPP.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it is a two-horse race between these two parties. And for any third-party candidate to actually do well, you have to ask yourself, I think three questions, which we call the iRIS keys. One, that do we actually have an incumbent or a challenger who is a new candidate? And if the incumbent or challenger is popular, that also adds credibility. But importantly, for the third-party candidate, you ask yourself, is there any charismatic or popular third-party candidate? And you can measure that in terms of like their campaigning, you can measure that in terms of the activities that they're doing on the ground. But the evidence actually shows that over the last 3 or 4 electoral cycles, unfortunately, the candidates that we've had as third-party candidates at the presidential level have been relatively weak, and they have not been able to canvass enough votes to be able to either send the election into a second round or, support that for the opposition. One thing that is very clear in all of this is that for any election to go into a second round, the third parties collectively need to poll in excess of 3% of the total cumulative votes. But the data actually shows that they are now doing between 1.5 and sometimes 1.8%, which is not enough to actually really send an election into a second round.
All right, Dr. Achampong, you talked about the methodology, but tell us which specific regions that the survey was conducted.
So this actually wasn't a survey. So this is an analysis of all of the historical election results from Ghana. So all the 16 regions, or in the past, that would have been 10 regions, and then narrowing it down to what is happening at the regional level. So you begin to see, when you break it down at the regional level, interestingly, although the national picture is quite not that good for third-party candidates, they actually poll much, much better in the three northern regions. Collectively, some of them are polling between 5 and 8% of the total national vote. Whereas when you look at the southern regions, so central, western, Accra, etc., they're doing between 0 and 2% of the total vote. But it actually raises an interesting question, which is that if you expect the southern regions to be relatively, if you argue, a bit more cosmopolitan and therefore more educated, then ex ante you would actually have expected that the third parties would have actually pulled more from the southern regions versus the north. But the data actually shows that it is the other way around.
All right. So you talk about the third parties, a performance declining, but the independent parliamentary candidates, their fortunes are, going up. Now, you talk about the independent parliamentary candidates, and you say that they are more likely to do well in the three regions of the north. Why do you say so?
Yeah, so it's actually quite a similar picture. Consistently, the data shows that if you're contesting as an MP and you're standing as, quote, an independent, then you tend to actually get much better results from the three northern regions than you actually would from the coastal regions. We think there are a number of factors, one of which actually is to do with the personality of the candidates themselves and the extent to which they are well known or accustomed in those communities. But also the other dimension is that even when they have been successful as independents, even in these regions, the evidence shows that they actually are not true independents as such. They are connected to either of the two main parties, so the NPP or the NDC.
Right. And speaking of independent candidates, there are some in both parties, the NPP and the NDC, who've been urged by their political leadership to step down and to allow, the candidate who was voted for to contest the elections. They have refused, insisting that they have more popularity in the area, and so they will go ahead. For such people, do you think that really, they have some sort of ties to the opposing party as well?
Not really, but interestingly, again, let me refer you back to the data. If you decide to actually contest as an independent MP because you fell out of the primaries on the ticket of both parties, etc., your chances actually aren't that great, right? And especially when you look at those regions or seats in which both parties claim to be their core voter base in Ashanti or Volta or in some other parts of the Western region, you actually are much more likely to fail than you are to win as a third party candidate. So basically what you then begin to see really is that the parties then begin to push their candidates or the person who felt aggrieved during the MP to give way for the whoever won to stand on the ticket. But the evidence or the data is quite clear on this, that if you decide to contest as an independent MP, after you, for example, lost a primaries, you don't really stand, that much of a chance.
In the past, independent presidential candidates have served as kingmakers in previous elections. Are we likely to see something like that happening this year?
I think this year, probably not. And the reason why, it goes back to the question I said earlier, the popularity or the appeal of the third party, presidential candidate. I think when I look at all the people contesting this year, we don't see that strong appeal, in that sense of the word, to be able to actually garner enough votes, but much more importantly, cumulatively when you add it up, cross that 3% threshold. That is where you begin to then see that sort of kingmaker role. We only have seen it in two elections in 2008 with Dr. Pakwesi Indum, and then of course we've seen it in the 2000 election where cumulatively Hagan, Edward Mahama, and Dan Latte, etc., pulled 7.4% of the total poll.
All right, Doc, hold on for me. We want to get some reactions from some political parties. We're joined by flag bearer of the All People's Congress, Hassan Ayariga, who's joining us via Zoom. Mr. Ayariga, I'm sure you've heard the data that's been churned out by Dr. Achampong. What's your reaction?
Yes, good afternoon, Araba. I hope you are doing well.
I'm very well. Thanks for asking.
Good. I listened to a doctor's analysis, and for me, I find it very difficult to accept such an analysis. Because relatively, if he's talking about weak candidates, then he doesn't even know what is happening on the ground as of now. That 2020 election is a different election altogether. And he needs to understand that platforms by NDC and MPP and their candidate does not really speak about their candidate. It speaks about the platforms they've gathered over the years. So anybody put on those platforms will have the opportunity of probably winning an election or probably being on the second round.
Ms. Ayariga, sorry to cut in, but what has changed this time with this year's election? You said this year's election.
This year's election is a very serious election. Ghanaians are very, very, very sad with the governance system of both political parties, and Ghanaians are disappointed in the two major political parties and are looking for change. Everywhere I go, every part of the country I go, I hear two words. One word is that you are bread, do. Yes, Sam is the second word. So he needs to come up again and revisit his research and look at the dynamics of 2020 against the relatively one he's talking about in the past. Clearly, in the past has indicated that the two major parties have ruled for some time now, but have failed to achieve the minimum requirement of basic necessity of life. And that has been the problem. So personality, if he's talking about personality, then he doesn't even know Hassan Ayariga very well. I have contested in 2012 with the two presidents. I'm contesting in 2020 with them, and it's going to be a very keen contest between the three political parties.
Yes, so the available data.
The issue that we have had over the years, the data he's talking about, I don't know where he has derived his data from. He's talking about history.
So this is all published Electoral Commission data. It's not from anywhere else.
So that history cannot determine the future. Don't forget, in many instances, history do not even determine what happens in the future. But what happens in the future is the ability and the willingness of the people and the ability of the candidate to push further. If you go around this country, you will realize that many people do not even want to see NDC and MPP political parties anymore. They are yearning for a party that will push, and any party that will push and meet the people one-on-one is likely to pull more vote than even the NDC and the MPP, because the people are yearning for that change.
So Mr. Ayariga, what will be the differentiating factor for your party to pull a surprise?
That factor is one-on-one with the people, the policies that we bring on board, not the promises that the NDC and the MPP have given them over the years and have failed them. What are the basic necessities of life? Water, food, roads, healthcare, and then talk about education and infrastructure. Look around and look at the five major regions he's talking about. These regions are lacking all these necessities of life. They don't have roads, they don't have water, they don't have food security, no basic healthcare, no schools. So if you are talking about basic necessity of life, these are the things that the ordinary Ghanaian is looking for.
So I can maybe quickly chip in on that. It's interesting you raised the point about Yabre and Yesisemu, etc. But actually, when you look again at the history of elections in Ghana, we've had similar rhetorics, right, in the past. And to actually point to Mahama Ayariga's own numbers, in the last election, the 2016 election, he actually just pulled a little under 22,000 votes, as compared to 5.7 million votes for the MPP, and then 4.8 or so million votes for the NDC. So I'm basically struggling to see how you are going to, or any other third-party candidate, not necessarily you, is able to actually overturn a 20,000 votes or in excess of that to, garner 5 million plus votes to win an election. That is the stark reality that we're dealing with. And number two, just a quick one. Number two is that although citizens often say that Yabre, Yesisemu, etc., in the latest survey that we conducted, which will be coming out next week, you begin to see fairly entrenched opinions in terms of who they would vote for, whether the NPP or the NDC. And there's very little showing, even with recent polling or survey data, that indicates that people would actually vote for an independent presidential candidate.
So, Mr. Ayariga, Mr. Ayariga.
Let me explain. Yes, let me explain something to Doc. Doc,
all right,
you see, when you go doing survey and you ask people about two political parties, you are likely to get results about two political parties.
No, the survey is not about two political parties. It's about all political parties and the willingness of citizens to vote for any political party. So just a quick correction. It's not just two political parties.
Doc, clearly, you even don't know my real name.
Huh?
So how did you do that research? You called me Mahama Ayariga when I'm Hassan Ayariga. That is number one.
Sorry, Hassan Ayariga, that's a slip of tongue. It's got nothing to do with the poll. But the poll actually has your name on it and other candidates. But the point is that collectively, either in the past or in the present, you are polling below 1.5% of the total average. And I struggle to see how you'll be able to overturn that from 30,000 polls to winning 6 million plus votes.
Doc, let me take you through statistics. It's more important for us to base our argument and debate on statistics.
Absolutely.
You mentioned 2012. Now, let me tell you, 2012 is different from 2020. Don't put those figures together.
This is 2016, 21,725.
2016, I did not contest. It's 2020. I didn't contest 2016. I contested 2012 and 2020. Now, let me take you through the statistics. If you look at the data, like you said, you realize that the NDC and the MPP has a platform, a voter platform of, let's say, 5 million.
Yes.
Plus or minus 5 million to 5.2, 5.3 there.
Right.
Now, we have a voter population of 18 million Ghanaians who are tired of these two political parties and do not even want to vote. We have met these numbers, the 8 million Ghanaians who are tired of NDC and MPP. Because MPP holds 5 million, NDC holds another 5 million. Sum them together, you have 10. But we have a deficit of 8 million Ghanaians out there who do not want to hear NDC and MPP.
And Mr. Ayariga, you're saying you've met all these 8 million?
The deficit is actually not 18 million. In the last election, it was actually more than that. One party polled in excess of close to 6 million.
We'll have to wrap this up. This is a very interesting
just a quick correction.
Very well.
Sure, but just a quick correction. The 2012 is you polled 25,797 votes.
Exactly. But if you allow me to land, you will...
Sure, please. Not a problem.
Mr. Ayariga, we are running out of time, so let's make it...
We want to educate the people and let the people know.
Very well.
See, let us not forget, no candidate is weak. When you talk about the weakness of political candidates, that's a misconception here. Let me tell you, you'll be surprised with 2020 election. Be opened in your discussions and see what is going to happen. 2020, Ghanaians will be shocked that the NDC and the MPP will be rejected.
All right, many thanks.
And one of them all.
All right, thank you so much for your time. That's APC flag bearer Hassan Ayariga. Earlier you heard Dr. Theo Achampong. He's co-founder of the research group iRIS.